this video, we're going to go over Claris Connect and its ability to integrate with Docparser and Claris FileMaker. Connect is Claris's new iPaaS, or Integration Platform as a Service, that allows you to link a lot of different services like FileMaker, MailChimp, QuickBooks, etc. Docparser is a service that will take PDFs or images and parse out and return the text. This video is a more detailed walkthrough, so I'm providing the following time keys to allow you to jump to specific areas in which you may be interested. First, let's go over the workflow of what we're trying to accomplish. First of all, I have an empty database, which is simply the invoices starter template included with FileMaker. I will go over the modifications that I made to this template later. I need to take the information from these invoices and bring them automatically into Claris FileMaker. So first I go to my invoices section. As you can see, each of these have no records in them, and I click on this button. Now I'm going to choose one of these files to bring in, and now I'm going to push it to Docparser. There is a delay while Docparser parses this information out, at least with the trial version. So I'm going to pause the video and then I will pick it up as soon as it comes in. And we just saw this populate. If I look over at customers, I have a new customer. And if I look over at products, I have all of the products that were on this invoice and this new invoice with all of its line items. So that is the functionality that we're going to be going over. Now let's go over Docparser and how to set things up to parse your documents. So Docparser allows you to set up different documents to parse and then return the data out to an API or other things. I'll show you one that I've already set up. One nice thing is it shows you the imported documents, so things that you've recently sent through, and you have the ability to see how the data was parsed, and you also have the ability to resend that information. For example, the one that I just sent, you can see all of the data, including the line items. We have muffin, chocolate, individual wrap. If I look over here, I have muffin, chocolate, individual wrap. So we have the same data being sent through. And if I choose another one, I can actually resend the information. I can replay this, and it will send the information right away. And you'll see right away I get a new record. This one came through much faster because it's not parsing the data, it's just resending the data that is already parsed. And as you can see, I now have 2 customers and 2 invoices and all of the products that relate to that. So how do we set up a parser to take a document and break out the information that we need? Well, we're going to be setting up parsing rules. And here's our list of all the parsing rules that I have set up for this one. Some of these were set up for me automatically. Actually, these first 3 lines right here. And then the ones below that were ones that I set up manually. The line items are something that takes a little bit more work, but it allows you to have line items that flow from one page to another, and it's very flexible. Let's take a look at this one. So, looking at this, when you select line item as an option to parse, it's going to automatically draw a line for you around the area where it finds the line items. This is great if you always have a single page, but if your form flows to more than one page, then you need to be able to get the same information on the second or third page. That's why you need to take off that original bounding box. After you set up your columns by adding new columns and adjusting where they are, then you can confirm the selection, and you'll see all of the data that is being brought in with those columns. As you can see, I don't need most of this information at the top, so I can add a filter. For example, this one starts in the first column and looks to see if it contains the word item. And then it skips that row, and then it moves down until column 1 has no value. That gets me this information right here. As you can see, I still have other pieces of information that I don't want. So my next filter checks to see if column 4 has a value. That gets me down to this. I still have one other row that I want to get rid of. So I just specifically say that that value, column 1, does not include the word empowered. This is where you just have to play with the information to get what you want. After all of that is done, I'll get a clean list of all of my line items. Other examples, since I know that my bill to name is in a specific place, I can just say this is where it is. My address, I take the line items and find where it says bill to, and then begin parsing the information from there. So these are the parsing rules that I set up. I can show you how to create a new parser. We're going to go ahead and use the invoices one since that's what I'm parsing right now. But as you can see, there's a lot of different options right now that will allow you to parse out standard formatted PDFs or images. So with this, we need to upload several examples, and when you do, you drag on different examples, then it will go ahead and after 2 or 3 examples, you can continue to the parser, and it will go ahead and figure out as much as it can up front and go ahead and create some of these rules for you. Again, looking back at the one that I already did, if I look at the invoice number, this is one that it figured out on its own. The invoice date also, and the totals. So it has a net, tax, total, and the confidence is how confident is Docparser that it is parsing this correctly. So now that you have your parsing set up, how do you get it further? Once we are successfully parsing the data, which we can see here, then we can move on to the next part. Now let's go over Claris Connect and its ability to connect to different services like Docparser and FileMaker. Since Claris Connect is new, I'm going to go ahead and start with a blank slate. And I'm going to build this out in front of you. The first thing I need is a new project. And I'm going to call this Docparser Invoices. And within a project, I have flows which make up the functionality of what I'm trying to do. So if I create a new flow, I'm going to say I'll call this one to Docparser. So this one is going to be taking information from FileMaker and passing it to Docparser. So I'm going to connect a new account. All right, it says that I successfully connected to that database. Next, this has the instructions for me to create a workflow that will connect from FileMaker to Claris Connect, and it has a specific URL that I need to use whenever I'm using the insert from URL script step. So I'm going to copy this. I have the functionality set up in FileMaker already, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to replace the other URL that I had with this URL so that I can test and send information from FileMaker. So here I have this insert from URL, and I have a specific URL that I'm previously had, and instead I'm going to replace that with this new URL. I'll go over what I'm sending to Claris later, but this is just to make the connection. Now, it says activate the script trigger in FileMaker to continue. If I go ahead and run this script, then it says connection complete. I can save that. Now that I have a trigger, I now need a new action, and in this action I'm going to be sending this information to Docparser. So its action is to parse a document. I want to connect to a new account, and I need my API key from Docparser. So back in Docparser, I can go to Integrations, and I can copy this, and I can paste it in here. When I sign in, I now have connected with the success, and I can continue. Now I want to select a parser. You can see the one that I created temporarily during this video, but I'm going to use my complete one, Connect to FileMaker. So here I could type in a specific URL for an invoice, but it would always be the same. I need something dynamic. So if I go over here, I can get information from the previous steps. For example, the script that I fired from FileMaker. Here is a URL that I'm passing as part of the JSON that I'm sending to Claris Connect. I can select that, and now I have what I need here. I also am going to get a specific ID, the record ID, so that I know which record I'm interacting with. I'm going to save that, and this process is now complete and ready. I can enable this flow, and then I'm going to go ahead and test this. So we have two records so far, 88 and 77. So I'm going to upload a new one. Let's pick 99 since I did 88 and 77. By the way, what I'm using here is 360works Supercontainer. The reason I'm using this is because in order to interact with Docparser, I need to have a publicly available URL for this document. So I'm just dropping this document into a Supercontainer field. So next I just fire the script that I recently fired that pushes the information to our new Claris Connect build in order to push it through to Docparser. Looking back over here, I can actually see the history, and I can see what happened. I can see that this was fired, including this URL and my record ID. I also can see what Docparser sent back. Here is my quotas, my file size, number of pages, and my status code of 200, which is a success. So that part is done, and Docparser now has the data, and it is going to go ahead and process. The problem is we don't have anything to do with that data after it finishes parsing. So let's create a new flow. And I'll call this from Docparser. So I'm going to select Docparser this time as the trigger, whereas last time I selected FileMaker as the trigger. And so when a new parsed document is completed, I'm going to use the same Docparser account. And I'm going to use the same Docparser parser. And then it says here, start the parsing of a document on Docparser to continue. The same way that we need to trigger from FileMaker to Claris Connect in order for Claris Connect to know what to expect. The same way we trigger something from Docparser in order for this to process. So let's take a look at Docparser. I can see that this did process, but it kind of processed and fell off the edge of the world. Like I showed you before, I can resend this. So let me replay this. And we see the connection is complete. Next we can add FileMaker, and we want to create a record with data that was parsed from the document. I'm going to use the same account that I set up previously. Now when picking a layout, it needs to have all the fields that you need, and also it needs to be at the root level. If it's inside of a folder, at this point, Claris Connect cannot see it. As you can see, Claris Connect automatically creates all of these fields that are equal to the FileMaker side whatever fields are on the layout. I have this field, JSON line items, so that I can bring in the whole block of JSON data that makes up the line items and then parse that out in FileMaker. I'm going to go through the same process of picking out these fields that were sent back from Docparser to put them into FileMaker fields. So this ID is the ID that I passed into the system to link things up. So now that I have these filled out, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to push some data through it from Docparser. So after triggering something in Docparser, I should see a history here. I can see from the create record step, I have a record ID and okay, no errors. So looking over at FileMaker, this is the layout that I used. As you can see, it matches the field names that are available over here under the create record. Has my layout name, and I have all of the fields here, including this bit of JSON right here, which is going into here. These are the line items. So the next step would be to parse this information out, for example, the line items, into FileMaker. And this button here actually does that, but what would be better is to have Claris run that for me. So let's do that. So let's add a new action to have that script run automatically. Now we're not creating a record, we're actually going to execute a script. I'm going to use the same connection. I'm going to choose the layout name. And I'm going to choose the script. I can also pass a script parameter, and I actually do need that. I just created a new record, and I want to make sure that I'm parsing the record that I just created. So I'm going here, and instead of getting information from Docparser, I'm going to get it from FileMaker, and I'm just going to get the record ID. So I can save that, and I am already enabled, so I can go ahead and run this again. So as before, I can go ahead and replay this, what was sent previously. That will go through Claris Connect. So if I look at the history, I can see that it did run. I can see that it executed the script with no error. And if I look, I can see that I have my 99 invoice with the customer and all of the products. And if I look over here, I can see that I have the invoice created that was most recently sent, the 101.99. And lastly, I'll go over the changes I made to this FileMaker application in order to parse out the data that was received from Claris Connect. For this, I cleared out the data and I removed the perform script step from Claris Connect. This will allow us to step through that script after the data is pushed through. Okay, let's start from the beginning with sending information. So as I mentioned before, I'm using SuperContainer, which is just a web viewer and a product of 360works, in order to put these files out on the internet, on my server. So I'm going to push this new document to Claris Connect, which will in turn push it to Docparser. And I'm going to wait for a new document to show up here. Okay, now that this record has been created, I actually have a lot of this information is under separate fields starting with parse, like address, company, confidence, etc. And that is so that I can make sure that this is not a duplicate invoice before I create it. So I'm going to open the script debugger. And I'm going to step through this process. This is the same script that will be run by Claris Connect. So we go to the record ID for the record that was created. And here I'm using a custom function that I created. So the custom function that I created captures all of the data from a layout and sets it into a JSON element. So my date field is here, my invoice ID it didn't have, my record ID field puts it here, the UUID field, all of the fields here, this JSON line items field right here has all that JSON in it, and the same thing with all these other fields. So I do that for ease of use so that I can just capture all the data at one time and then put it where I want it. So that's what this JSON variable holds there. Next, I check to see if the ID already exists for this invoice. If it does, I just want to flag it as being an error and exit. Otherwise, I go back to the record ID that I was on and set the ID invoice. Next, I check to see if the customer exists. Otherwise, I create it, and then I link that invoice to that customer. Then I go through each of the products and either create the product or capture the ID from FileMaker of that product back into the JSON so that I have all of that information to create the line items with the proper IDs for the different products that were either created or already existed. I also update the price of the product from this import. This assumes that all of these invoices are being done in order from oldest to newest, so that the more recent invoice is going to have the more correct price. Next, I create each of the invoice line items, looping through this array of objects here and setting in each of the invoices. If you don't have line items, you may not need this much parsing. You may be able to just grab the data directly from Docparser and create a FileMaker record with it and not need to run any script to clean up the data. Once this is all run, which I'm going to go ahead and run through it now, then I end up with my full invoice. If you would like help or coaching with Claris Connect, Claris FileMaker, or any other FileMaker integrations, feel free to reach out to Empowered Data Solutions at info@empoweredds.com.